When did we become numb? When did we start accepting the unacceptable? When did the level of violence get so high that people started ignoring it? Welcome to Rising Crime. A few days ago, I was scrolling through some news articles and I came across this story about a 10-year-old that had been shot. And I kept scrolling past and past and past, completely dismissed the story. But it stuck in the back of my head. And at one point I went, I should go back to that one and just see what the story is. So I went back to that story, I found it again, and there was no story there. It wasn't something that I felt like I could cover because it wasn't something that anyone was going to be interested in. And it made me really start to wonder how we got to this point that a kid getting shot isn't newsworthy. It may or may not have even made the local news in the city that he was living in. It should be news, but it's not. Maybe in like a state like Hawaii that doesn't have a lot of shootings, maybe it makes the news there. But it probably doesn't make the news in any major city in America. But it should. Somebody getting shot at that young of an age, that should matter to people. But it happens so often that people just look past it. People don't even think twice about it really anymore. It's just something that happens. They might say, oh, that's too bad, and they'll go on with their day. And then you have places like Chicago that they probably don't even cover all the murders that they have. They certainly wouldn't cover a shooting unless somebody died because there's too many of them. 35 people were shot just last weekend. I doubt they covered any of them. They may have mentioned the 35 as a total at the end of the weekend, but I doubt any of those stories got individually covered in the city of Chicago because the 8 murders probably didn't all get covered. It's just not newsworthy anymore. And you take things like mass shootings, which are still kind of newsworthy, only because the news doesn't really talk about them, unless it's a big one or one that fits their narrative, they won't talk about it. So mass shootings kind of still are newsworthy. But at some point, they're not going to be either. And incidents at schools, those happen more often than people think. Shootings. There have been at least 45 incidents in schools just this year. How many have you heard of? I'll wait. Because you can probably name 1 or 2. That's 45 just this year, and I bet you can maybe name the Michigan State University one. That I think 3 people died in that one. I think 5 were injured. That was a bigger one. That was a mass shooting, so we heard about that one. And that Covenant School in Nashville, everyone heard about that one. That one made huge news. But other than that, there were at least 45. How many of them can you name? And unless one happened at the school in the city near you, I bet you can't name a single one. There's been a mass shooting every day in April so far. Did you know that? Every day. There's been 35 of them. And so this is the 19th that I'm filming this, and so far on the 19th, there has not been one. But there's been one every day up through the 18th. And the information may or may not have been updated, or maybe there won't be one today. Maybe it'll be a day that we don't have a mass shooting. But the first 18 days in the month of April had at least one mass shooting every single day. Somebody getting shot is not newsworthy. And mass shootings, along with incidents at school, these things they don't want you to know about. So that's not really newsworthy in the sense that they don't want you to know about it. There have been 165 mass shootings this year. How many have you heard of? I try to cover most of them, but there's a lot of them that are, just drive-bys or things that there's not a story there. It's just 4 more people got shot or killed, and there isn't a story there, and so I don't even cover it. But I try to cover most of them because it should be newsworthy. People should care about that. But how many can you name out of 165? 5? 10? If you can name 15 of them, you follow crime very closely. Because I doubt your average person could name more than that Covenant school. That would have been a mass shooting. Same with the Michigan State. That was a mass shooting. Although I don't know how many people heard of the Michigan State as far as any kind of national thing. But that Covenant school, for sure, people would know that one. Maybe the Monterey Park one, people heard of. That one was huge at the time. But depending on what part of the country you're in, I bet if you ask the average person on the street how many mass shootings there are in 1 year, they maybe would say 10, 20. They're certainly not saying 300, 400, because they would have no idea. If you ask them how many mass shootings have there been in America just this month, they would maybe say 1 or 2. They're not going to say 35. And we've had, as far as the mass shootings go, just in this month, we had one in Hawaii, which I looked back, and I only went back to 2018 because that's kind of 2019 and on, that's kind of when things started getting worse. And I didn't come across one in Hawaii going back to 2018, so maybe there's been one there. But for the most part, they don't have mass shootings there, but they had one this month. And Maine even had one just the other day. And Maine is a place that they haven't had one. I don't remember when the last one was there. Maybe it was a couple of years ago, maybe 2020, I think. It's been a few years. They don't have them in Maine very often as well. But people don't hear about this stuff because nobody talks about it. Because I don't think they want you to know about it. And I looked up the homicides in Chicago because I was curious on, like, a place like Chicago. If you live there, you have to be completely numb to the amount of crime that goes on there, the amount of shooting and the amount of people that die. You have to be completely numb if you live there. Because I looked back, and I could only go back to 2006 was as far as I found information on Chicago. But going back to 2006, there wasn't a single year that had less than 400 homicides. Not 1 year. And the lowest one was like 411. There's been a few over 700, but there hasn't been one below 400. And I looked up because I was curious about Chicago because Chicago's only going to get worse. And they're losing 40 to 50,000 people a year from their population. And that's before all this Safety Act. I don't know what's going on with that. And this new mayor situation, which is going to make things worse. But they're losing 40 to 50,000 people a year. That's kind of a lot. And you figure, they're losing 600, 700 to homicide. But the rest of the people, they're just moving out. And I don't feel sorry for Chicago at all. I mean, Chicago, they had Lightfoot as their mayor, who quite possibly is one of the worst mayors in the entire United States, but definitely the worst Chicago's ever had. And they managed to find and elect somebody that's actually going to be worse. I don't even know how it's possible. I mean, you had to actually seek out somebody to find somebody that was going to be worse than her, and they found them. And not only did they find them, they elected him. And you know why he got elected? because he was black and the other guy was white. The white guy was saying things that sounded like he was going to make the city safer. Or at least try to make the city safer. He was saying things that sounded like, hey, this guy might be able to make this better. This guy might be able to make my neighborhood better. That's the kind of stuff he was saying. And the other guy's saying all this ridiculous stuff that anyone that's really paying attention would know it's not going to make it any safer. Not even a little bit. And they elected this guy, and the areas of town that elected him were the very areas that needed the other guy more. But they didn't elect the other guy because the other guy was white. So you have these bad areas, largely minority areas, that voted for this guy. And you got all the white libs who don't live anywhere near that voted for this guy. And the city's going to get worse. They had already, he's not even in yet, they had mobs of people destroying the city. And he's saying things like, oh, they're out there, they need food. They need food. He was actually on a news, I don't remember what channel it was. And he's telling them that these people just needed food. And he made it sound like it was okay that they're looting and busting up places. And that's okay because they need food. Well, I guarantee if they look at the stuff that they stole, they weren't stealing bread. They weren't stealing, hamburger meat. I just did a story on the Arco gas station that happened in Compton, California, where there was like 100 kids that just busted down the front door to this Arco and went inside. You want to know what they stole? They didn't steal food. They stole alcohol and cigarettes. And they weren't in there for food. So anytime these people are saying they're stealing food, they're not. If they were stealing food, they'd go to the grocery store. If they needed food to eat, they would go to the grocery store and they would steal armloads of food from the grocery store. That is not what they're doing. When you see these people run into these places and run out with armloads of clothing, that's not food. They don't need food. They're doing this because you're letting them get away with it. Nobody is even trying to stop them. They do this. The Compton one, the police said flat out they were outnumbered, and for safety reasons, they weren't going to stop it. And there were 3 incidents like that in Compton that night of big, huge mobs of people, young teenagers that probably shouldn't even be out as late as they were, just causing trouble in the city. They're leaving these incidents and they're doing burnouts in their car on the city street. Nobody is stopping them. Where do you think this is going to go? It's not going to stop. I heard Philly is the mayor's race is coming up there, and they're talking, a couple of the people there are talking about stop and frisk. What is stop and frisk going to do? It's not going to do anything. When you have DAs that aren't prosecuting the crimes or people that aren't keeping these people in jail, stop and frisk, maybe it makes it a little better, but it's not going to help. Anytime I feel like doing a story on an out on bond murderer, I don't have to look very hard. Because people that murder while they're out on bond, it happens all the time. If I want to do a story on someone that has murdered someone while out on bond, I'll find a story on it. It's not hard. They're everywhere. It happens all the time because they're letting everybody out of jail. And if they kept the people in jail, maybe some of these problems wouldn't be as bad as they are. But people have become so used to it that nobody's really even complaining about it. I worked this last weekend. I had to work in Minneapolis. And I looked up the neighborhood that I was working in before I went there, because anytime I have to go to a city like Minneapolis, I look up where I'm going to go so I know how much my head needs to be on a swivel. And the area that I was in definitely wasn't the worst area of Minneapolis, but it was not a safe area. And I was working with this guy from Los Angeles. And this guy's telling me how he had been out the night before walking around at like 11 p.m. He was walking around the streets. I don't remember what he said he was doing. And he said, it felt completely safe to me. He goes, I didn't think anything was wrong with it. Well, when I had driven through, there's garbage everywhere. And I had looked up the stats on that neighborhood, and it wasn't a safe neighborhood to begin with. So I went in with kind of the knowing that it wasn't going to be that safe of an area. But there's garbage everywhere. And I'm like, there's no way this is a safe area if there's this much garbage here. Because a nice neighborhood, they would clean this stuff up. And this guy, he's saying, yeah, it was completely fine. I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. So we start talking about Los Angeles. And he starts telling me how he, on a daily basis, is walking over needles on the sidewalk and homeless people and all this stuff. And he's telling me about, like, basically what an average day is for him. And I was like, okay, compared to that, I'll give you that this is a nice neighborhood. Because compared to what he described, what he goes through on a daily basis in Los Angeles, that area of Minneapolis that we were in, that was a good area. I come from a better area than where I was in Minneapolis, or a safer area. And to me, that was a bad area. That guy from Los Angeles that I worked with, he has become numb to pretty much everything. And he was a skinny little guy. Like, he didn't look like somebody that could defend himself. He's one of those people that are just ignoring it and taking it as a fact of life, that this is just what things are like. And he just goes on with his life, and he doesn't really even care or do anything about it. He doesn't care. He just hopes nothing's going to happen to him. But that's kind of where we're at, is that people, it's gotten so bad that people are just ignoring it. Because the area we were in was not a safe area. I definitely would not have been out walking at night. I went from the hotel to work to the hotel. That's it. I didn't even drive around anywhere. That was all I did. And luckily we were in a nice hotel that had a restaurant and everything, so I didn't even have to leave. But that guy, to him, hey, this is a safe area. There weren't apparently homeless people to step over. Although Minneapolis there's big groups of homeless people there too, but he didn't have to step over any in the area that we were in. But that's kind of where we're at, is people are either numb to it, or they're ignoring it, or they've just accepted it. And I don't think it's going to get any better anytime soon, because the whole system across the country needs a complete overhaul. There is not a single major city in the United States that you can name that is safe. Not one. There are others that are safer than others, but there's not one city that you could name that is legitimately safe. The end of last year, I did like these reading the names of people, the victims of homicide, and I did London. London's got like 9 million people or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but it's a lot of people they have in London. They had just over 100 homicides. London, as far as homicides would go, would be considered an extremely safe city, because that's not that many for a city of 9 million. But you can't find that in the United States. I mean, you could name a city like Billings, Montana, which is the largest city in Montana. So in Montana, it's a big city. But it wouldn't make the top 100 in the United States, size-wise. I mean, it's probably 120,000 people in Billings, something around that anyway. That's a safe city, but that's not a major city. It might not even make the top 200. I bet it doesn't even maybe makes the top 300. It's not a very big city. Biggest city in the state of Montana, but it's not a big city by any means. I don't think there's a major city you could name that you could actually say was safe. That there would be little to no risk of becoming a homicide victim if you went there. I don't think there is one. There's some safer than others, yeah. but I don't think you'll find one that's safe. And I don't see it ending anytime soon. So we're either numb, we've accepted it, or we're ignoring it. That's basically what it comes down to.